Welcome to Down the Garden Path. I'm your host, Joanne Shaw, landscape designer and plant lover. I enjoy discussing down to earth tips and advice to help you seasonally manage your garden and landscape. And I also aim to bring you interesting and relevant topics to educate you all about the landscaping and horticultural industry. Welcome to Down the Garden Path podcast. Thank you for joining me here today. And I'm excited to talk to you, kind of excited to talk to you about fall mums and fall planting and fall annuals. So we're going to talk about fall mums, and I want to give you a little bit of history about them. You see them everywhere. They kind of start every year. They seem to come out earlier and earlier. They're all at the big box stores. So I just want to give you a little bit of history about mums, and then I'll give you my opinion about mums and what we should really be doing. So fall mums are actually chrysanthemums, and I know the term chrysanthemum often reminds you of a more something you'd get at a flower shop and or in many mixed bouquets that you may purchase. So there are many horticultural varieties and cultivars that including the florist mums that I mentioned, but also garden mums. So all chrysanthemums are native to East Asia and Northeast Europe. So that's something to keep remembering. They really became popular in North American gardening during the 60s and 50s and 60s when it started to become popular to, decorate for the seasons. And they their colors are vibrant. You can get bright yellows, bright pinks and purples, and even some of the deeper like burgundies and almost copper color mums. So they do make a range of colors that everybody can find the color that matches their house or matches their fall decor. So they also are, because they bloom late in the season and they will withstand some cooler temperatures and drought, not really drought conditions. They do like to have their water. So the one thing about the fall mums that you might see already potted in containers is that because they're nursery grown, they have been pruned and fertilized and pruned and fertilized and pinched back to keep that really tight shape, that dome shape that you see, and that really continuous blooming all the way the same heights and really nice shape to them. So that is something to remember that they are. I almost think about it as more manufactured in a way, right? Because they've been just controlled to keep that way. And they may overwinter in our gardens. So you will find people who have tried to figure like, oh, let me see if it'll grow. And thanks to our changing weather, they do grow in our gardens. They do require, some mulching and some extra care. But because they're not being pinched back and fertilized and pinched back and pruned and really controlled, they will get to be quite large. So people think it's, they're putting in that small pot of mums that they're putting in their garden will come back next year looking about the same size, maybe a little bit bigger. Meanwhile, it's tripled in size because they get taller and they get wider. They don't really spread in the sense of jumping to other parts of the garden, but they do start to, drown out other plants and in your garden. So you really have to be careful of that if that's something that you want to do. So you often hear in sometimes the garden tips, I may even have it in my book, I should double check, that often if you do have them in your garden, it's recommended in like June or July to actually cut them back so that because we don't want them blooming and until later in the season anyway, and that's when they're going to bloom. So there's no sense in them getting taller and taller. So that's one way to control the size is by cutting them back midsummer, and then they start growing again, and then they'll be a reasonable size when they're ready, when they start blooming. So that's something that you can do. But me, and I'm focused on low maintenance gardening. So to me, there's nothing low maintenance about that. So the fact that you have to watch the size, you have to cut it back, remember to cut it back midsummer. I'm not fond of doing peony hoops and string and all these things to kind of keep things standing up. So that is really, again, I really want to steer people towards low maintenance things. So if you do want to do that and you do want to grow them, then you should be aware that they do need continuous water, especially in containers. And that's my one challenge with people with them selling them earlier and earlier when it's hot out still. Those pots just dry out so quickly. So then, by the time it's fall, everybody, well, not everybody, but most people in the neighborhood have a pot of dead, sad-looking mums on their front in their front yard, as opposed to colorful mums. So that is really something to keep in mind if you consider buying them this time of year. And they do get they can get powdery mildew, and they can get some spider mites and aphids, but especially if you're doing, like, if you're watering watering them above, just quickly with the hose or spray hose, that type of thing, the foliage will get some mildew, and especially when you do buy them early and it is still fairly humid out. So that's something to consider. But like I said at the beginning of the show, this is an honest chat about mums. And so I wanted to talk to you about, do we really need mums? First of all, as a designer, my goal is always to create gardens that are where there's something growing all the time, including the fall, including right to the frost. So I really feel that if it's better to focus on that as opposed to spending money on something that really becomes a throwaway plant. And don't get me started on the plastic waste of all that plastic with the pots. So yeah, so first of all, that's what I want to say, is that there are lots of plants and lots of things we can do in containers to brighten up all the spots in our garden by using perennials and using small shrubs to really extend the color all season long. But I realize that that's not for everybody, and that takes a little bit more planning and a little bit more forethought. But I do want you to know that it's possible. So if you too do not like the plastic waste and the look of dead mums come October 1st, then consider that in your spring planning for your spring container. We can make sure that we can plan things that will last right until the fall. So the other thing I want you to consider is that as pollinators. So, yes, the mums are a flower and they do have some pollen, and you will get some bees and wasps, visiting them for pollen. But really, they're really not a real great source of pollen or a benefit to any other pollinators. So, I want you to consider asters. Now, you might, when I say the term asters, you might not know what I'm talking about. The purple New England asters often are also available with the annuals at the big box stores and your garden centers, but they don't look they're usually sold with the mums, but they look a little bit different in the sense that they're more of a little daisy flower, a purple daisy with a yellow center. In my experience, and this goes back to when I worked at a garden center, less of those were always purchased compared to the garden mums. And I don't know if that is still the case at garden centers. I guess I have to go out and find out for you, but you can find them. But did you know there's all these aster varieties that are available at your perennial section, even in May and June at your garden center? They're just not blooming yet. They haven't been forced because they're perennials. And so they don't really look like much. And I think they get often overlooked. So I wanted to review a few things with you about why I think you should choose asters. I personally like the daisy shaped flower better. And I think it's something, that the insects like better as well. Now, all the colors aren't the same, so I'll tell you about the colors so that you can't get it's not a tit for tat as far as the color availability between the two. But I still think the benefits for moving away from mums and moving to asters outweigh the color choices. So asters not only supply pollen for honeybees and native bees, they also feed adult butterflies, which is what we all want more of in our gardens, right? And we don't forget that they are also host plants to over 100. Well, you didn't know, so how could you forget? But they are host plants to over 100 species of caterpillars. And I know many of you are thinking, well, I don't want caterpillars in my garden. Well, you kind of do, because that's nature's those are nature's bird feeders. They're not harmful caterpillars. They're not nothing like the box tree moth and all the, the damaging type of caterpillars, but they are a lot of our other butterflies and moths, start out as a caterpillar, and they need a host plant to feed their young. Like milkweed is a host plant for monarchs. But there are many other things in nature, insects in nature, that need that. And I also think caterpillars in the garden are really nature's bird feeders. So if you want to attract birds to the garden, then it's also having caterpillars in the garden is a good thing. So if you are lucky enough to find the New England asters in pots at your garden center being sold as an annual, or that's great. And they can go into your garden right now. You can find a spot, you can plant them in your garden, and they will overwinter in the garden. So that's great. So now for next year, you won't have to buy it because you will have it in the garden. There are several other varieties that are also sold, like I said, in the perennial sections of your gardens. We just don't know about it, or you need to ask and ask your garden center your to bring them in for you if you don't see them. So I just wanted to talk about a few of my favorites. So, like I mentioned, the New England aster, full to part sun, blooms August to October, moist, average soil, and they tend to be purple, bright purple, pinky purple with a delicate daisy with a yellow center. Swamp aster. So again, there's one for every area in your garden. So if you are putting it as a perennial, then it could be a solution to a problem you may already have. For instance, the people that have the gardeners that may have a wet area. Swamp aster. So it is also purple, light purple, full to part sun, blooms August to October, and it loves being in a wet area. White wood aster, white based on its name, and it grows in part shade to full shade, September to October, and will grow in a garden from moist to dry. So it has a pretty good range that it will grow in. And lastly, heart leafed aster, lavender to light blue in color, again, part shade to full shade, September to October, and medium to dry soil. So if you've got that challenging soil, then that's something to look for. So I do want everybody to consider when you see all those pictures of mums at the grocery, even at the grocery store, they're there, right? Is think about what could you do better and what could you buy that will last in your garden with a lot of work, certainly no staking required, and really feed all the pollinators, and especially late in the season. I think that's another benefit. All these different pollinator gardens that we're talking about in native plants, it's really important. We don't need all of those blooming in July, in June and July and August. We need that late season of those pollinators that can feed those insects late in the season as well, which is great that a lot of the asters go into October. And with our weather changing a bit, I'm sure they're going into November as well. So I may do, if you're interested and you want me to do more of a deep dive on native asters, then I would love to do that. So I love your feedback. Again, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. If you love your garden mums and you've already bought them and they're already at your front porch, I just wanted you to be aware of, pros and cons and some things that you may be able to do differently next year. Or if you don't want to keep buying mums and you want to you may not have known that you could plant them in the garden. So I hope this episode helps you. I hope you really enjoy it and informs you, as I always try to do, always looking for new topics and problems that I can solve for my listeners. So please give me any feedback you can. I would love to hear it. Thank you for joining me down the garden path, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.